I never thought my own daughter would use my dog against me. Even the dog loves mom more than you, she said at my 67th birthday dinner, her words cutting deeper than any knife. What she didn't know was that I had kept every single veterinary record, every receipt for food and medication for the past decade. Proof that I was the only one who had truly cared for Max all those years. But when Max mysteriously disappeared the next day, I discovered something far more devastating than a cruel comment. My own family had been plotting against me, labeling me mentally incompetent, planning to put me away and sell my home. All I had left was a faded red collar and a broken heart. How do you fight back when the people who should love you the most are determined to erase you? If you've ever felt betrayed by family, if you've ever had to rebuild your life from nothing, or if you've ever known the unconditional love of a loyal pet, this story will break your heart before putting it back together again. Follow our channel for more emotional true stories like this video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. I remember that night so clearly, even now. My 67th birthday. Most men my age would be surrounded by family, maybe grandchildren, cake with those candles that refuse to blow out no matter how hard you try. But there I sat, alone in a crowded room, watching the steam rise from a roast chicken that Martha had made, the same dish she'd prepared for my birthday for almost 40 years. No candles, no cake, no happy birthday song. The dining room was our battlefield that evening. The mahogany table I'd restored myself 20 summers ago stretched between us like a no man's land. Martha sat at the far end, her eyes carefully avoiding mine as she methodically cut her food into perfect little squares. And Megan, our daughter, well, she only showed up because her mother had insisted. Your father's birthday, Martha had told her over the phone that morning. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but our house in Millfield has those thin walls that don't keep secrets well. Just come for dinner. 1 hour of your life. That's all I'm asking. So Megan arrived 20 minutes late, clutching her phone like a shield. She was 32 now, with her mother's sharp cheekbones and my stubborn chin. The arrogance in her posture was new, something she'd cultivated in the years since college, something I didn't recognize. Sorry I'm late, she muttered, though we all knew she wasn't. I pulled out her chair, the same chair she'd sat in since she was tall enough to reach the table without a booster seat. Thanks for coming, sweetheart. She didn't answer, just slid into her seat and immediately began scrolling through her phone. The blue light cast a harsh glow across her face, making her look like a stranger. No phones at dinner, Megan, Martha said softly. You know the rule. Megan rolled her eyes, actually rolled them like she was 16 instead of 32, but placed her phone face down beside her plate. The silence that followed was excruciating. The scraping of forks against plates, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the occasional whimper from Max, our golden retriever, who lay at my feet as always. I tried. God knows I tried. How's work going? I asked Megan, reaching for the salt shaker. That promotion come through yet? It's fine. 2 words. That's all I got. Martha jumped in, her voice artificially bright. Megan's department just landed the Johnson account. Isn't that right, honey? It's not a big deal, Mom. Of course it is. Your father and I are very proud. Can we not do this tonight? Megan interrupted, stabbing a piece of broccoli with unnecessary force. The whole happy family charade? It's exhausting. The room went still. Martha's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Megan, please, she whispered. It's your father's birthday. And that's when it happened. That moment that keeps replaying in my mind even years later. Megan looked up from her plate, her eyes cold as January frost, and without even raising her voice, she said it. Even the dog loves Mom more than you. The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt my hand go slack, the knife I was holding slipping from my fingers and clattering against the plate. Under the table, Max shifted, pressing his warm body against my foot as if he knew I needed the comfort. I looked at my daughter, this person I'd taught to ride a bike, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid by working double shifts at the factory for years. And I forced my lips into what must have been a grotesque parody of a smile. But inside I felt like she'd taken everything I'd ever done for our family and spat on it. I pushed my chair back from the table. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor. Another restoration project I'd completed with my own 2 hands on weekends when I could have been fishing with my buddies. Without a word, I walked to the hallway dresser and pulled open the middle drawer. My hands found the red folder immediately. I'd been keeping it for years, never imagining I'd need it for something like this. When I returned to the table, I placed the folder down gently between the serving dishes. It fell open, spilling its contents: veterinary records, food receipts, antibiotic prescriptions, all in my name. 10 years worth of evidence that I was the one who'd cared for Max since the day we'd brought him home as a puppy. "What's all this?" Martha asked, frowning. I didn't answer her. I was looking at Megan, waiting for her to meet my eyes. She glanced at the papers, her expression unchanging. Then she looked up at me, that venom still there, swimming in eyes that used to light up when I came home from work. "Then why does he always follow her around?" she asked, her voice flat. I looked down at my feet where Max had been lying just moments before, but he wasn't there anymore. From the kitchen came the soft clicking of his nails against the linoleum as he followed Martha's scent, and in that moment, I knew our family was already broken beyond repair. The separation papers would come later, but the true fracture? It happened right there on my 67th birthday, over a roast chicken that no one really wanted to eat. I woke up on the couch the next morning, my back stiff and my mind foggy. For a moment, I forgot about everything that had happened at dinner. Then reality crashed back like a wave. Megan's words, the silence, the papers scattered across the table. I rubbed my eyes and called for Max, expecting to hear the familiar thump of his tail against the floor. Nothing. "Max?" I called again, my voice echoing through the quiet house. Still nothing. I pulled myself up from the couch, wincing as my knees protested. The digital clock on the DVD player read 6:42 a.m. Too early for Martha to be up, especially after last night. I shuffled to the kitchen, expecting to find Max curled up in his bed by the back door. The bed was empty. So was the water bowl beside it. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Not quite panic, not yet, but its close cousin. I opened the back door and stepped onto the deck I'd built when Megan was in high school. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of Mrs. Patterson's roses from next door. "Max!" I called, louder this time. I scanned the yard, looking for the familiar flash of golden fur among the azaleas or near the old oak tree where he liked to dig. Nothing moved except the cardinal that had nested in our birdhouse 3 springs in a row. I checked the gate. Locked, just as I'd left it yesterday afternoon when I'd taken Max for his walk around the block. I always double-checked the latch, a habit formed years ago when Max was a puppy with a talent for escape. Back inside, I checked every room. Under beds, behind couches, in the laundry room where he sometimes hid during thunderstorms. Nothing. By the time Martha came downstairs at 7:30, I was sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, trying to make sense of it all. "Where's Max?" she asked, tightening her robe around her waist. "I don't know," I admitted. "He's gone." She frowned, opening the back door to look outside herself. "Did you check the yard? Maybe the gate was left open." "The gate wasn't open," I said, more sharply than I intended. "I locked it. I always lock it." Martha's expression hardened. "Well, he didn't just vanish into thin air, Edward." The accusation hung between us, unspoken but clear. She thought I'd been careless, that I'd somehow lost our dog through negligence. I spent the morning driving around the neighborhood, stopping at every corner to call Max's name. I showed his picture to everyone I met: the mailman, the teenagers shooting hoops at the end of the street, old Mrs. Abernathy who spent her days watching the world from her front porch. "Golden retriever, about this high," I'd say, holding my hand just above my knee. "He's 10 years old, gray around the muzzle, answers to Max." No one had seen him. By afternoon, I'd put up posters on every telephone pole within a mile radius. By evening, I'd called every animal shelter in the county. Nothing. I tried calling Megan 3 times. The first 2 calls went straight to voicemail. The third time, she answered with an irritated, "What?" "Max is missing," I said, cutting to the chase. "He disappeared this morning." "Have you seen him?" A pause. Too long to be natural. "No," she finally said. "Why would I have seen him?" "I just thought, look, Dad, I've got a meeting in 5 minutes, I've got to go." The line went dead before I could say goodbye. On the third day, desperation drove me to Pete's Pet Emporium on the edge of town. I'd been buying Max's special senior dog food there for years, ever since the vet said his joints needed extra care. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and Sammy, the college kid who worked weekends, looked up from the register. "Mr. Wilson," he said, recognition lighting up his face. "No Max today?" I swallowed hard. "Actually, That's why I'm here. Max is missing. Has been for 3 days now. I was wondering if you might have heard anything. Sammy's expression changed. A flicker of something. Recognition? Concern? Crossing his features. Missing, huh? That's strange. He hesitated, glancing toward the back of the store where his manager was restocking shelves. What is it, Sammy? I pressed, leaning closer. He lowered his voice. I heard something yesterday. Might be nothing, but Jake from the rescue shelter downtown mentioned a golden was dropped off. Had a blue collar with the name Max on it. My heart lurched in my chest. Where? Which shelter? Second Chance Animal Rescue. On 7th Street, near the old theater. I didn't even thank him. I was already moving, pushing through the door, keys in hand. The drive downtown was a blur. Red lights, stop signs, horns blaring as I cut someone off. I didn't care. My mind was racing faster than my old Buick could ever hope to match. Who would take Max to a shelter? Why would anyone do that? The shelter was a low brick building with paw prints painted on the windows. I parked haphazardly, one wheel on the curb, and burst through the front door. A young woman with pink-streaked hair looked up from behind the counter, startled by my entrance. "Can I help you?" she asked, her hand hovering over the phone as if ready to call security. I tried to catch my breath, suddenly aware of how I must look. An old man, unshaven, wild-eyed, breathing hard. "My dog," I managed to say. "I was told my dog might be here. Golden retriever, 10 years old. His name is Max." Her expression softened slightly. "We did get a golden a few days ago. Let me check." She typed something into her computer, then frowned. "Yes, we have him. He's in observation right now." Relief flooded through me like a physical force. My knees nearly buckled. Thank God. There must have been some mistake. "I'd like to take him home now." She hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't release him yet. The surrender paperwork needs to be processed, and we need to complete our health assessment." "Surrender paperwork? I didn't surrender him. He's my dog. He disappeared from my yard." Another pause. The woman's eyes darted to her screen again. "According to our records, he was surrendered by..." She squinted at the screen. "A young woman who claimed to be his owner's daughter. She said the primary owner, that would be you, I'm assuming, was no longer capable of caring for him properly." The room seemed to tilt. "What are you talking about? I'm perfectly capable." She cited concerns about early-stage Alzheimer's. The woman said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "Said you'd been forgetting to feed him, forgetting to let him out." That's when I knew, as surely as if I'd seen it with my own eyes. Megan hadn't just taken Max to hurt me. She'd taken him and created a story, a cruel, calculated fiction, that would ensure I couldn't get him back easily. My own daughter had stolen my dog and labeled me mentally incompetent in the process. "Sir, would you mind telling me your full name?" The woman sitting across from me wore a navy blue blazer and a practiced expression of professional concern. Her badge read, Diane Winters, Social Services. She'd been called in after I'd spent 20 minutes trying to convince the shelter staff that I was perfectly competent to take Max home. "Edward James Wilson," I answered, my voice steadier than I felt. She made a note on her clipboard. "And your date of birth?" "March 17th, 1958. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking, not from any neurological condition, but from pure, undiluted rage. "Do you know where you are right now, Mr. Wilson?" I met her gaze directly. "I'm at the Second Chance Animal Shelter on 7th Street, trying to reclaim my dog who was stolen from my yard and surrendered here under false pretenses by my daughter." Diane's pen paused over her notepad. Her eyes, a warm brown that reminded me painfully of Megan's before teenage rebellion had hardened them, studied me with clinical precision. "Mr. Wilson, no one is accusing you of anything," she said, though we both knew that wasn't true. The accusation was there, invisible but massive, filling the small consultation room where we sat. "We just need to ensure that Max will be properly cared for." "I've cared for him for 10 years, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. "I have records, veterinary visits, grooming appointments, prescription refills, all showing that I've been a responsible pet owner, and we'll certainly take that into consideration." Her tone was placating, the kind you'd use with a child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. "But your daughter has expressed concerns about recent changes in your behavior." My daughter is angry with me. The admission tasted bitter on my tongue. "We had an argument the night before Max disappeared. This is her way of punishing me." Diane made another note. I wished I could see what she was writing. Was she documenting my paranoia or my delusions? Or was she perhaps beginning to see through the web of lies Megan had spun? Mr. Wilson, do you live alone? No, with my wife Martha. For now, at least. I hadn't meant to add that last part, but it slipped out anyway. For now, I sighed. We're going through a rough patch. Have been for a while. I see. More notes. And does Martha share your daughter's concerns about your health? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Did she? Martha had been distant lately. More than distant. Cold. Critical. Quick to point out my mistakes. But I'd attributed that to the natural erosion of a marriage that had lasted too long out of habit rather than love. Had she been watching me for signs of cognitive decline instead? You'd have to ask her, I finally said. The questioning continued for another 30 minutes. What medications was I taking? Had I experienced any memory lapses recently? Any confusion about time or place? Did I ever forget to turn off the stove or lock the door? By the end, I felt hollowed out, exposed in ways I'd never anticipated when I'd rushed to the shelter that morning. Finally, Diane closed her notebook. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Wilson. We'll need to verify some information before making a decision about Max. In the meantime, would you like to see him? Just to make sure he's okay? The relief was so intense it made me dizzy. Yes, please. She led me down a corridor lined with kennels. The cacophony of barking and whining scraped against my already frayed nerves. And then I saw him, my Max, lying on a thin blanket in a cage barely big enough for his aging frame. His ears perked up when he saw me, and he struggled to his feet, tail wagging hesitantly, as if he wasn't sure whether to believe his eyes. Hey, buddy, I whispered, crouching down despite the protest from my knees. Max pressed his nose against the chain-link door, trying to reach me. I slipped my fingers through the gaps, feeling the warm rasp of his tongue. I'm gonna get you out of here. I promise. The drive home felt surreal. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror for a long moment before starting the car. Who was this man with the lined face and silver hair? Was this how Megan saw me now? Not as her father, but as an old man losing his grip on reality? Is that what Martha saw too when she looked at me across the dinner table? For the first time, I allowed myself to consider a terrifying possibility. What if they were right? What if there were gaps in my memory that I wasn't aware of? What if I had been forgetting things and just forgetting that I'd forgotten them? No. I shook my head vigorously, as if I could physically dislodge the doubt that had taken root. I remembered everything. The vet appointments for Max's arthritis, the special food he needed, the exact time of day he preferred his walks. I remembered Megan's first steps, her first word, duck, not Dada as Martha had always claimed, the name of her third-grade teacher, Mrs. Abramowitz, who wore cat eyeglasses and smelled of peppermint. My memory was fine. I started the car and pulled away from the shelter, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I needed to talk to Martha, to understand if she was part of this conspiracy, for lack of a better word. When I reached our house, the house I'd painted myself just 2 summers ago, the house with the crooked mailbox that I kept meaning to fix, I sat in the driveway for almost 30 minutes. I watched the curtains for movement, wondering if Martha was watching me back. Was she on the phone with Megan right now, discussing their next move? Were they planning to have me evaluated by a geriatric specialist? Placed in a home? Finally, I went inside. Martha was in the kitchen chopping vegetables for a salad she would barely touch. She looked up when I entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Where have you been?" she asked, the knife continuing its rhythmic motion against the cutting board. "At the animal shelter," I said, watching her face for a reaction. "Someone took Max there, said he'd been surrendered. By our daughter." The knife paused, then resumed. "Chop, chop, chop. That's ridiculous. Why would Megan do that? That's what I'd like to know." I moved closer, until I was standing on the opposite side of the island. "The shelter says she told them I have Alzheimer's, that I can't take care of Max anymore, or myself." Martha set the knife down and looked up at me, her face a mask I couldn't read after 39 years of marriage. "You're exaggerating, Edward. You always do this. Make everything into some grand conspiracy against you." "Am I exaggerating?" I leaned forward, placing my palms flat on the cool granite. Then explain to me why our dog is in a cage at the shelter right now instead of here at home. She sighed, a sound of exasperation rather than guilt. Megan was just trying to protect Max. You haven't been yourself lately. You forget things. Important things. Like what? Tell me one important thing I've forgotten. Martha turned away, opening the refrigerator and staring into it as if the answer might be hiding between the milk and the leftover lasagna. I'm not going to stand here and list your failings, Edward. It's exhausting and it doesn't help anything. I felt something break inside me then, the last fragile thread of what had once been love, perhaps. Without another word, I turned and walked to our bedroom. From the closet, I pulled down an old shoebox I'd kept for years. Inside were the treasures of fatherhood. Megan's childhood drawings, a Father's Day card she'd made in 2nd grade with macaroni glued to construction paper, and a small red collar with Max written on it in my own awkward handwriting. The collar was from when Max was a puppy. Too small for him now, but a reminder of the day we'd brought him home. Megan had been in college then, home for the summer. She'd been the one to suggest we get a dog. To keep you company when I'm not here, she'd said. And for a while it had worked. Max had filled some of the emptiness left by Megan's absence. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the tiny collar in my palm. I'd saved these things because they meant something to me, because they were physical proof of connections that sometimes felt too fragile to trust. Now, even those tangible reminders felt like they belonged to someone else's life. The days after my confrontation with Martha stretched into weeks, each one more silent than the last. Our house, once filled with the comfortable noise of family life, became a tomb of unspoken accusations. Martha and I moved around each other like ghosts, careful never to occupy the same space for too long. We'd perfected the art of mutual avoidance in a 800-square-foot ranch house, a skill that might have impressed me if it weren't breaking my heart. Max remained at the shelter. Despite my protests, despite the records I'd presented, despite the decades of responsible pet ownership, I was caught in bureaucratic limbo. The shelter needed to complete their assessment. Social services needed to follow proper protocols. Everyone needed to ensure the best interests of the animal were being served. Meanwhile, my dog, my friend, languished in a cage barely big enough for him to turn around in. Megan didn't come back, not once, not even to check if her accusations had landed as intended. She wouldn't answer my calls, and when I drove past her apartment building one afternoon in a moment of desperation, the concierge wouldn't even confirm if she still lived there. I'm her father, I'd said, hearing the pathetic note of pleading in my voice. I'm sorry, sir, the young man had replied, not looking sorry at all. It's against building policy to disclose resident information. I'd stood there on the sidewalk, staring up at the gleaming high-rise where my daughter lived a life entirely separate from mine. Was she watching from one of those windows? Was she hoping I'd leave? Or was she not home at all, outliving her life without a second thought for the father she'd effectively labeled as mentally incompetent? I hadn't told Martha about losing my job. It happened 4 months before our separation, but the truth was, our marriage had been failing long before that. Miltech Manufacturing, where I'd worked for 22 years, had been gradually outsourcing operations to Mexico. They'd called it strategic repositioning. We called it what it was, being replaced by cheaper labor. We're letting go of everyone in your division who's within 5 years of retirement age, my supervisor had explained, not quite meeting my eyes. The severance package is generous, 6 months' salary, health benefits for a year. I'd nodded, numb. 22 years, and it came down to a manila envelope with forms to sign. At home, I'd put on the same show I'd been putting on for months. I'd get up at the same time, put on my work clothes, pack my lunch, and drive away. Instead of going to Miltech, I'd go to the library, the park, sometimes just sit in my car in the mall parking lot. I lived on unemployment benefits and by selling my old tools and collectibles online. It wasn't sustainable, but it bought me time to figure out what came next. Martha never asked why I stopped bringing home paychecks. Either she didn't notice the change in our bank account or, more likely, she didn't care enough to ask. By then, we were already strangers sharing a mortgage. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, about a week after my visit to the shelter, I was alone in the house. Martha had gone to her sister's for the day, an increasingly common occurrence. I sat at our desktop computer, the outdated Dell we kept in the spare room that had once been Megan's bedroom. I rarely used it. Martha was the one who kept in touch with friends through social media and email. But that day, something compelled me to check her accounts. It wasn't difficult. Martha used the same password for everything, Megan's birthday followed by our anniversary. I clicked on her email telling myself I was looking for communication with the shelter, perhaps evidence that she was trying to resolve the situation with Max. But deep down, I knew I was looking for confirmation of what I already suspected, that Martha and Megan were united against me. What I found was worse. There were dozens of emails between them, stretching back months. They discussed me as if I were a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed. They used phrases like emotional incapacity, involuntary admission, and, most chillingly, accelerating the house sale. From meganwilsoneggmail.com to marthawilson1958@hotmail.com. Subject: Dad situation. Mom, I spoke with Dr. Hendricks again. He says many men Dad's age struggle with emotional regulation, especially after career displacement. The anger episodes you described could be early warning signs. He recommended a place called Willow Creek. It's a voluntary admission facility, very nice. Not at all like those depressing nursing homes. They specialize in cases like Dad's. I know it's a big step, but we need to consider it before things get worse. I worry about you being alone with him, especially if the episodes are increasing in frequency. Let me know what you think. I can set up a tour for us. Just us, not Dad yet. Next week. Love, Meg. My hands trembled as I scrolled through more messages. Anger episodes? What anger episodes? I couldn't remember raising my voice to Martha in years, let alone doing anything that would make her fear for her safety. And career displacement? So she did know I'd lost my job. She'd known all along and had been discussing it with Megan behind my back. I kept reading, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. From Martha Wilson1958@hotmail.com to Megan Wilson subject: house valuation. Megan, the realtor came by while your father was out yesterday. She says we could list for $375,000 in this market, even with the outdated kitchen. I didn't sign anything yet. I think we should wait until after we get him settled at Willow Creek or somewhere similar. The realtor suggested staging the house, which means we'll need to clear out a lot of his stuff. Can you help with that when the time comes? You know how he gets about his projects and collections. I've started looking at condos in Lakeside Villas, the one near you. The idea of being closer to you and eventually grandchildren is the only thing getting me through this awful time. Love, Mom. P.S. Don't forget to call the vet about Max. Dr. Simmons needs to know he'll be coming to live with you after everything is settled. I sat back in the chair, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. They were planning to sell our house. My house. The one I'd spent decades improving with my own hands. They were going to put me in some facility and divvy up the life I'd built as if I were already dead. And Max. They were planning to give him to Megan all along. The shelter was just a temporary holding place until they could get me out of the picture. That night, I lay on the couch in the living room, staring at the ceiling I'd repainted just last spring. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Max wasn't there to curl up at my feet, but the silence was the same. Empty. Accusatory. I took out the folder of documents, now considerably lighter since I'd given copies to the shelter. In the dim light of the single lamp I'd left on, I began to write a letter that I wasn't sure would ever be read. Megan, you don't have to love me. I've made my peace with that. But I would have liked, just once, for you to see me. Not the father you resent or the burden you're trying to discard, but the man who taught you to ride a bike, who checked under your bed for monsters, who worked double shifts to pay for the dance classes you begged for and then quit after 3 months. I would have liked for you to see that I tried my best, even when my best wasn't good enough for you or your mother. I would have liked for you to know that Max wasn't just a dog to me. He was the only one in this house who still seemed happy to see me at the end of the day. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if it would matter if you did. But I needed to write it anyway to remind myself that I exist outside of the story you and your mother have created about me. Dad. I folded the letter and slipped it back into the folder. Outside, a car drove by, its headlights briefly illuminating the room before plunging it back into shadow. In that moment of clarity, I made a decision. I wouldn't go quietly. I wouldn't be packed away into some facility while my wife and daughter dismantled my life. I would fight. For my dignity, for my home, and most of all for Max. Because even if my daughter believed I was nothing more than a failing old man, I knew better. And I was going to prove it. 2 months passed like a slow-motion car crash. Martha moved out 3 weeks after I discovered the emails, taking half the furniture and all of the wedding photos. She didn't ask about Max, not once. It was as if he had never existed in her world. Just another responsibility she was happy to shed along with our marriage. I had been calling the shelter every Monday and Thursday, asking about Max's status. The answers were always the same. Still under evaluation, paperwork processing, waiting for supervisor approval. I began to suspect they were deliberately stalling, perhaps under instruction from Megan. But I kept calling, because what else could I do? Then on a gray Tuesday morning in November, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number with the local area code. I answered cautiously, half expecting a collections agency or a telemarketer. "Mr. Wilson?" a young woman's voice asked. "This is Caitlin from Second Chance Animal Shelter." My heart leaped to my throat. "Yes? Is it about Max? Is he okay?" There was a pause, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "Sir, I'm calling because Max has been showing signs of illness. Our veterinary staff diagnosed him with an ear infection that's become quite serious. Since you're still listed as his emergency contact in our system, we wanted to inform you. An ear infection. My poor boy. Max had always been prone to them, especially in his right ear. I used to clean his ears weekly with a special solution from the vet, something that Martha and Megan had apparently neglected to mention to the shelter staff. "How bad is it?" I asked, already reaching for my car keys. "It's concerning," Caitlin admitted. "The infection appears to have gone untreated for some time before he came to us, and it's now affecting his balance. He's having trouble standing. Guilt washed over me like a wave. I should have fought harder to get him back. I should have hired a lawyer, filed complaints, done something more than just making phone calls twice a week. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, already heading for the door. The shelter looked the same as it had the first time I'd rushed there 2 months earlier. The same brick building, the same paw prints painted on the windows. But this time when I walked in, the receptionist was a different person. A young man with kind eyes and a nameplate that read, "Ethan Rodriguez DVM. "I'm here about Max," I said, slightly out of breath from hurrying. "Golden retriever, 10 years old. I just got a call that he's sick." Ethan looked up, recognition dawning on his face. "Mr. Wilson?" I nodded, confused. "Do we know each other?" He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes, not the practiced customer service smile I'd come to expect from shelter staff. "You probably don't remember me. I was just an intern at Westside Animal Hospital when you brought Max in as a puppy. First vaccination appointment. He was terrified of the scale. The memory hit me with unexpected force. Max, barely 8 weeks old, trembling on the metal examination table. Me, a new dog owner, nervously asking the young intern if this was normal, if I was doing everything right. "You showed me how to hold him to make him feel secure," I said slowly. "You had me wrap him in my jacket." Ethan nodded, pleased. "That's right. I was still in vet school then. Graduated last year and started working here part-time while I build my practice." He glanced at his computer screen. "Let me check on Max for you." He typed something, his expression growing more serious as he read. "The ear infection is pretty advanced. Our staff vet started him on antibiotics yesterday, but he's not responding as quickly as we'd like. Can I see him?" Ethan hesitated. "Technically, since his surrender status is still pending review, I'm supposed to get authorization first." He looked around the empty reception area, then lowered his voice. "But I'm the only one here for another hour, and what my supervisor doesn't know won't hurt her." He led me through the back door into the kennel area. The familiar cacophony of barks and whines surrounded us as we walked past rows of cages. Most contained pitiful-looking mutts, pressing hopeful faces against the chain link when we passed. I remembered reading somewhere that shelters were overwhelmed with surrendered pets after the pandemic, when people who'd adopted companions during lockdown discovered they didn't actually want the long-term responsibility. "He's down here," Ethan said, leading me to a quieter section reserved for animals with medical needs. We moved him to reduce stress. Max's cage was in the corner. Unlike my previous visit, he wasn't standing alert when he saw me. He was curled up on his bed, his once vibrant golden coat now dull and his eyes cloudy. But when I knelt down, something sparked in those tired eyes. He struggled to his feet, wobbling slightly, and made his way to the front of the cage. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm here now." Max whimpered softly, pressing his nose against the chain link. I slipped my fingers through to touch him, feeling the warmth of his fur, the dampness of his nose. "Do you still have it?" Ethan asked quietly from behind me. "Have what?" "The collar with his name. The one you made by hand. Red nylon with Max written in black marker." I reached into my pocket and pulled it out. I'd been carrying it with me every day since finding the emails, like a talisman. "You remember that?" I asked, surprised. Ethan nodded. "It made an impression on me. Most people just buy collars from the store. But you wanted him to have something personal, even if it wasn't fancy." I held the tiny collar up, the memory of fitting it around Max's puppy neck suddenly vivid in my mind. He outgrew it so fast, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Ethan smiled. "Some bonds can't be broken, Mr. Wilson, not by time or distance." He paused, choosing his next words carefully, "or by other people's actions." He unlocked Max's cage and helped me guide the old dog out. Despite his wobbly legs, Max managed to make his way to me and collapsed with a sigh, resting his head on my foot just like he used to do every evening when I'd sit in my recliner to watch the news. "He still remembers you," Ethan said softly. "Of course he does." I knelt down, ignoring the protest in my knees, and gently stroked Max's head. "We're family." We sat there for a while, the three of us, in the quiet corner of the shelter. Ethan explained the treatment plan for Max's ear infection. Antibiotics twice daily, special cleaning solution, follow-up testing in 2 weeks. He talked about the shelter's policies, the legal complications of Megan's surrender claim, the steps we'd need to take to resolve the situation. But underneath the practical discussion ran a current of understanding. Ethan wasn't just a veterinarian dealing with a routine case. He saw what was happening, the injustice, the betrayal, the pain of separation. As we were leaving the medical area, Max walking unsteadily beside me, Ethan said something that stayed with me long after I left the shelter. "There are some things that not even time, nor bitterness, nor forgetfulness can erase, Mr. Wilson. The connection between you and Max is one of them." I looked at him. This young man who had once been a nervous veterinary student and was now standing before me with the quiet confidence of someone who understood suffering, both animal and human. "Thank you," I said simply. "I'll do what I can to help with the paperwork," he promised. "I can't make any guarantees, but I'll try to speed things up." As I reluctantly left Max behind once more, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not because anything had fundamentally changed in my situation. My wife was still gone, my daughter still believed me incompetent, my dog was still legally in limbo, but because for the first time, someone had seen through the labels and accusations to the truth underneath. Someone had remembered the man I really was. True to his word, Ethan worked small miracles through the bureaucratic maze of the shelter system. 3 weeks after our meeting, Max came home. Not permanently, the legal status of his surrender was still in question, but as a medical foster placement under my care. The paperwork described me as his temporary caretaker while his ear infection healed. Ethan had stretched the truth, claiming that Max's recovery required a familiar environment and specialized care that the shelter couldn't provide. The day I brought Max home, the house felt alive again for the first time since Martha left. His nails clicked against the hardwood floors as he reacquainted himself with every corner, every room, every scent that had faded during his absence. He was thinner, his movements more cautious, but his eyes had regained some of their old spark. When evening came, he settled into his bed by the fireplace with a deep sigh that seemed to say, "Finally." I sat in my recliner, watching him sleep, hardly believing he was really there. The house still felt empty without Martha, without Megan, but Max's presence filled some of the void. We were 2 old bachelors now, left behind by the women who had once claimed to love us. Ethan came by the next day with medication for Max's ears and a bag of premium senior dog food. "I had some samples at my other practice," he explained, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. "Thought Max might benefit from the extra joint support formula." I knew he was lying. The bag was too large to be a sample, but I accepted it with gratitude. My finances were stretched thin between household bills and legal consultations about the house that Martha was still trying to force me to sell. "You didn't have to do that," I said. Ethan shrugged, a casual gesture that reminded me suddenly of his youth. He couldn't have been more than 30, with his whole life ahead of him. "Just looking out for a patient." But it wasn't just the food. Over the next few weeks, Ethan became a regular visitor at our house. He'd stop by after his shift at the shelter, ostensibly to check on Max's recovery, but our conversations gradually expanded beyond veterinary concerns. He'd stay for a cup of coffee, sometimes for dinner, listening to my stories with genuine interest. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching Max sniff around the yard, I asked him the question that had been nagging at me since our first meeting at the shelter. "Why are you doing all this? Going out of your way for an old man and his dog?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, gazing out at the twilight settling over the neighborhood. "My father was a lot like you," he finally said. "Worked hard all his life, built things with his hands, never complained." He took a sip of his coffee before continuing. "He died when I was in vet school. Massive heart attack, no warning." "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. Ethan nodded. "The thing is, we weren't speaking when it happened. I'd come out to him the year before, told him I was gay, and he didn't handle it well. Traditional guy, old school values. Said he needed time to process." A sad smile crossed his face. Time ran out before he could. I looked at this young man anew, seeing not just the kindness and professionalism I'd noted before, but also the invisible wounds he carried. "You know what the worst part was?" Ethan continued. "After he died, I found a letter in his desk. Unfinished, unsent. He was trying to reach out to tell me he was sorry, that he loved me no matter what. But he never mailed it, never called, just kept working on the letter, trying to find the right words. The parallels to my own situation weren't lost on me. I thought of the letter I'd started writing to Megan, the one still sitting in my desk drawer, unfinished, unsent. So when I see you and Max," Ethan said, "I guess I see a second chance. A chance to help someone else's father have the reconciliation mine never got." Max limped over and rested his head on Ethan's knee, as if sensing the emotion in his voice. Ethan scratched behind the dog's ears, careful to avoid the still tender right one. "My daughter thinks I'm losing my mind," I confessed. "That I'm unstable, incompetent, maybe even dangerous." "And are you?" Ethan asked without judgment. "No, at least I don't think so." I stared down at my weathered hands. "I forget things sometimes, where I put my keys, whether I've taken my blood pressure medication, but nothing serious. Nothing that would make me a danger to myself or others." "Have you tried telling her that?" I laughed bitterly. "She wouldn't believe me. She and Martha have already decided what the truth is." Later that night, after Ethan had gone home, I pulled out the letter I'd started to Megan. Reading over the words I'd written weeks ago, I realized they were all wrong. Too defensive, too hurt, too full of the raw pain I'd been feeling at the time. I crumpled the paper and started fresh. "Dear Megan," I wrote, my hand shaking slightly. "I miss you. Not just now, but for years before this. Somewhere along the way we lost each other. I don't know exactly when or how it happened, but I'd like to try to find our way back." I wrote for hours, filling page after page with memories, questions, hopes. I wrote about her childhood, about the day Max came into our lives, about the pride I felt watching her grow into a successful woman. I wrote about my confusion over her accusations, my hurt at being labeled incompetent, my fear of losing my home and my independence. And then I came to the part where I needed to write, "I forgive you." My hand froze over the paper. The words wouldn't come. Not because I didn't want to forgive her, but because the wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. It wasn't just that she'd accused me of mental decline. It was that she hadn't even given me the chance to defend myself. She'd made decisions about my life, my future, my capabilities without ever once asking for my side of the story. I set the pen down and stared at the unfinished letter. Was this how Ethan's father had felt? Trapped between love and hurt, wanting to reach out but not knowing how to bridge the gap? That night, Max didn't sleep in his bed by the fireplace. Despite his arthritis, he climbed onto my bed and pressed his warm body against mine, as if sensing that I needed the comfort more than he needed the extra space. His breathing, slow and steady, lulled me into a fitful sleep. The next morning dawned cold and clear. I woke early, before the sun had fully risen, and went to check on Max. But he wasn't in his usual spot at the foot of the bed. Panic gripped me for a moment until I found him in the living room, lying unnaturally still beside the coffee table. "Max?" I whispered, kneeling beside him. His eyes were open but cloudy, his breathing shallow. When I touched his side, he didn't respond except for the faintest thump of his tail against the carpet. I called Ethan immediately, my voice breaking as I explained the situation. He arrived 20 minutes later, medical bag in hand, his face grim as he examined Max. "It's not good," he said quietly. "His body is shutting down. The infection may have spread, or it could be his age, or both." "Can't you do something?" I pleaded. "Take him to your clinic, give him medicine, anything." Ethan placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson. Sometimes all we can do is make them comfortable." He helped me create a soft nest of blankets for Max in front of the fireplace, his favorite spot. He showed me how to administer pain medication, how to check if Max was in distress, how to know when it was time to say goodbye. Before he left, Ethan embraced me, not the professional sympathy of a veterinarian to a pet owner, but the genuine comfort of one human to another who understands loss. "Call me anytime," he said. "Day or night. I mean it." Max held on through the night, his breathing growing more labored as the hours passed. I lay beside him on the floor, my hand resting lightly on his side, feeling each breath become more of a struggle than the last. "It's okay, buddy," I whispered, as the first light of dawn crept through the windows. "You don't have to fight anymore." Max's eyes found mine one last time, filled with a lifetime of loyalty and love. Then he sighed, a soft exhalation that seemed to carry his spirit with it, and was gone. Ethan came to take him away, handling Max's body with a dignity and respect that brought tears to my eyes. As we wrapped Max in his favorite blanket, Ethan said something I'll never forget. "You didn't lose everything today, Mr. Wilson. You taught me what it means to be a father, and that gift will live on long after both of us are gone." 2 years passed, like the slow turning of seasons. I sold the house, not because Martha demanded it through her lawyer, but because it had become a mausoleum of memories I couldn't bear to live among anymore. I found a small rental cottage on the outskirts of town, a one-bedroom place with just enough yard for the garden I'd always wanted to plant, but never had time for during my working years. Life narrowed to simple rhythms: coffee at dawn, gardening until the heat became too much for my aging body, lunch on the porch watching birds at the feeder I'd built, evenings with books from the library or old movies on my small television. It wasn't unhappiness exactly, more like existing in a muted world where colors had lost their vibrancy, where joys and sorrows alike were experienced through a buffer of solitude. Martha finalized our divorce without ever speaking to me directly. All communication went through attorneys. I learned from the grocery store clerk who'd known us for decades that she'd moved to Arizona with her sister. Good for her, I thought without bitterness. At least one of us had escaped the cold Midwestern winters. Megan remained a ghost in my life, present only in her absence, in the birthday cards I sent that received no response, in the Christmas presents returned unopened. I stopped trying after the first year. Some wounds are too deep to bridge with Hallmark sentiments. But Ethan stayed. He visited every Sunday without fail, bringing takeout and stories from his veterinary practice. He'd recently opened his own clinic, a modest operation focusing on senior pet care. Inspired by Max, he told me with a smile that reached his eyes. He brought me small gifts: a potted herb for my garden, a book about woodworking he'd found at a yard sale, once even a hand-carved walking stick when my arthritis began to make longer walks difficult. "You don't have to keep checking on me," I told him one Sunday as we sat on my tiny porch watching a thunderstorm roll in from the west. "I'm not your responsibility." He'd looked at me with those earnest eyes. "Is that what you think this is? Responsibility?" I shrugged, embarrassed. "I don't know why else a young man like you would spend his Sundays with an old codger like me." "Because you're family," he said simply. "The family we choose is sometimes more real than the one we're born into." I didn't have words to respond to that. We sat in comfortable silence as the rain began to fall, turning my garden into a symphony of plinking droplets and rustling leaves. It was Ethan who changed everything, though neither of us expected it. About 6 months after Max died, he'd asked if he could take a video of me telling the story of how Max and I first met. For a project, he'd explained vaguely. I agreed, thinking little of it. He'd set up his phone on a tripod in my living room and asked me to talk. So I did. Told the story of the day Megan and I went to the shelter, how all the other dogs barked and jumped while Max sat quietly in the corner of his pen, how he'd come right to me when I knelt down, how he'd rested his head on my knee as if to say, "There you are. I've been waiting for you." While I was talking, Ethan had slipped away and returned with something I hadn't seen in months. The old video from the shelter security camera that had captured the moment Max recognized me after Megan had surrendered him. Ethan had obtained it as evidence to help with my case, but we'd never needed it in the end. He'd kept it all this time. He edited the two videos together, my story of meeting Max as a puppy, followed by the security footage of our reunion at the shelter years later. Max, despite his illness, struggling to his feet when he saw me, making his way to the front of the cage, the unmistakable recognition in his eyes. Ethan posted it on one of those video platforms where things sometimes go viral. He titled it simply, "Senior Dog Recognizes Real Owner After Years." The response was immediate and overwhelming. The video was shared hundreds of thousands of times. It appeared on morning shows, evening news, special segments about animal loyalty. People wept in the comments, shared their own stories of pets who remembered them after long separations. Someone started a fundraiser for senior dog medical care in Max's name. For a few weeks, I was mildly famous in a way that made me profoundly uncomfortable. Strangers recognized me at the grocery store. Reporters called asking for interviews. I declined them all, retreating further into my solitude. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, much like any other, my phone rang. The number was familiar in a way that made my heart stutter. I'd dialed it countless times over the past 2 years, always reaching voicemail, never receiving a call back. Megan. My hand trembled as I answered. "Hello? Dad?" Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, uncertain in a way that reminded me of the little girl who'd once called for me during thunderstorms. "Dad, is that you?" I saw the video. I couldn't speak for a moment, my throat closing around words I'd rehearsed 1,000 times but now couldn't seem to find. "Dad?" she said again. "Are you there?" "I'm here," I finally managed. "That dog in the video, the one recognizing his owner at the shelter, that was Max, wasn't it? And that was you?" "Yes," I said simply. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of her breathing. When she spoke again, her voice broke. "I didn't know. I didn't know any of it. Mom said you'd neglected him, that he was sick because you forgot to take care of him." The familiar anger threatened to rise, but I pushed it down. "That wasn't true." "I'm starting to see that," she whispered. "Dad, would it be okay if I came to see you? To talk? In person?" Hope, that dangerous, fragile thing, flickered to life in my chest. "I'd like that." She arrived the next day, standing on my porch with a bouquet of flowers clutched in her hands like a shield. She looked both familiar and strange, the same sharp cheekbones and stubborn chin, but with new lines around her eyes that spoke of her own struggles in the years we'd been apart. "I wasn't sure you'd want these," she said, holding out the flowers, "but I didn't know what else to bring." I took them, our fingers briefly touching. "They're nice. Thank you." The conversation that followed was painful, halting, filled with long silences and careful words. She told me about the divorce from her perspective, how Martha had convinced her I was declining mentally, how they'd both believed Max's deteriorating health was evidence of my inability to care for him or myself, how they'd thought they were protecting both of us by intervening. "But why didn't you just talk to me?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. "Why go behind my back?" Tears filled her eyes. "Mom said you'd just deny everything, that people with your condition often don't recognize their own symptoms." She looked down at her hands. I believed her because it was easier than facing the truth, that our family had been broken for years, and none of us knew how to fix it. When she finally worked up the courage to hug me goodbye, she trembled in my arms like she had as a child after a nightmare. "I'm so sorry," she whispered against my shoulder, "for everything. Can you ever forgive me?" I wanted to say yes, to tell her all was forgotten, that we could pick up where we'd left off before the fractured dinner, before the accusations, before Max was taken away. But the truth caught in my throat. "Not today," I said gently, "but I think I could someday, if we both try." She nodded, understanding. As she walked back to her car, she turned once more. "Can I come back next week?" "I'd like that," I said, and for the first time in years I meant it. Reconciliation is never a straight line. Megan and I learned this in the years that followed our tentative reunion. Some weeks brought easy conversations over coffee on my porch, reminiscing about happier times from her childhood. Other visits ended in tense silence after one of us inadvertently picked at a still healing wound. We were like dancers learning a complicated routine, constantly stepping on each other's toes before finding our rhythm again. But we persisted. Every Sunday, she would arrive at my cottage with pastries from the bakery downtown. We'd sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in the same space. Slowly, the silences became comfortable rather than charged. The past remained there, behind us, acknowledged but no longer standing like a wall between our hearts. Ethan continued his visits too, now on Saturdays instead of Sundays. He brought his partner Michael, a quiet architect with kind eyes and a talent for fixing things around my aging cottage. The four of us formed an unconventional family of sorts. Sunday dinners became a tradition, with Megan bringing dessert, Ethan and Michael contributing the main course, and my small garden providing fresh vegetables. "You've got quite the family here," my neighbor Mrs. Abrams remarked one evening as she watched them all leave after dinner. "Not what you'd expect, but it works." She was right. It wasn't the family I'd pictured in my younger years. No grandchildren running through a sprawling backyard. No holiday gatherings around the dining table Martha and I had chosen together decades ago. But it was real and warm and honest in a way my first family never managed to be. Martha remained in Arizona, sending the occasional postcard that said little of substance. I didn't mind. Whatever we'd once meant to each other had faded long ago, leaving only faint outlines like old photographs left too long in the sun. One Tuesday morning, about 5 years after Max died, I woke with a strange pressure in my chest. Nothing dramatic, just a heaviness that made breathing a bit more work than usual. I'd felt something similar the day before but had dismissed it as indigestion from Mrs. Abrams' enthusiastic use of garlic in the casserole she'd brought over. By afternoon, the pressure had grown, accompanied by a dull ache that radiated down my left arm. Even I, stubborn as I was, recognized the warning signs. I called Ethan. "I think I might be having a heart attack," I said without preamble when he answered. "Nothing urgent, but probably should get checked out. Are you—" He stopped himself from asking if I was joking. "I'm coming right now. Don't move. Don't try to drive yourself. Don't do anything but sit down and wait for me." In the emergency room, under the harsh fluorescent lights that made everyone look half dead already, a doctor confirmed what I'd suspected. A mild heart attack, she called it, though there was nothing that felt mild about the fear I'd seen in Ethan's eyes as he'd rushed me to the hospital. "You're lucky," the doctor said, reviewing my test results. "Minimal damage to the heart muscle. With medication and some lifestyle changes, you should recover well." Lucky wasn't how I felt as they transferred me to a regular room for overnight observation. I felt old and vulnerable, and suddenly aware of my mortality, in a way I'd managed to avoid thinking about until now. Ethan stayed at the hospital until visiting hours ended, despite my insistence that he should go home to Michael. "I'm not leaving you alone," he said firmly, reminding me so much of myself at his age. Stubborn, principled, loyal to a fault. Megan arrived shortly after I was settled in my room, her face pale with worry. "Why didn't you call me first?" she demanded, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry. That's not important. How are you feeling?" "Like an old man who should have known better than to ignore chest pain," I admitted. She took my hand, her fingers cool against my skin. "Don't you dare check out on me now, Dad. Not when we've just found our way back to each other." I squeezed her hand. "I'll do my best." The heart attack changed things, as brushes with mortality often do. Megan insisted I move in with her. "Just temporarily, while you recover," she said, though we both suspected it might be more permanent. Her apartment had a small guest room that overlooked a park, much nicer than my cottage with its increasingly difficult stairs and distant location from medical facilities. Ethan helped with the move, carefully packing my meager possessions. He took special care with the small wooden box where I kept Max's old collar, treating it like the precious relic it was. As months passed, my temporary stay at Megan's apartment took on a permanence neither of us acknowledged aloud. My medication routine became part of her morning checklist before leaving for work. My favorite chair from the cottage found a home in her living room. My gardening books joined her collection of novels on the built-in shelves. I began to see sides of my daughter I'd never known before. Her early morning grumpiness before coffee, her meticulous organization of spices in alphabetical order, her habit of talking to plants while watering them. Small intimacies that parents of young children take for granted, but that I was experiencing for the first time with my adult daughter. One evening, as we sat watching an old Western, my choice, that she was tolerating with good grace, Megan suddenly muted the TV. "Dad," she said, turning to face me, "there's something I need to tell you." My heart did a little stutter that had nothing to do with my medical condition. In my experience, conversations that began this way rarely brought good news. "I'm pregnant," she said, a tentative smile spreading across her face. 12 weeks. I had the first ultrasound yesterday. I stared at her, processing the words. Pregnant. My daughter. A baby. A grandchild. "Say something," she prompted, her smile faltering at my silence. "Who's the father?" I asked, immediately regretting the question when her face fell. "I'm sorry. That's not... I'm happy for you, truly. Just surprised." "It's complicated," she admitted. "Jason and I have been seeing each other for about a year. He's a good guy, but we're taking things slow. He knows about the baby, and he wants to be involved, but we're not rushing into anything." I nodded, still trying to wrap my mind around the news. "Are you happy?" I finally asked, the only question that really mattered. Her smile returned, radiant in its certainty. Terrified, excited, overwhelmed, but yes, incredibly happy. I took her hand, my vision blurring unexpectedly. "Then I'm happy too." As my health declined over the following months, more small heart episodes, increasing arthritis, the indignities of aging that no one warns you about, Megan's pregnancy progressed. Her belly grew as my strength waned, a poetic balance that wasn't lost on me. Life continuing its cycle, indifferent to our human dramas. Ethan remained my most dedicated visitor, even as his veterinary practice flourished and demanded more of his time. He monitored my health with professional concern layered over personal affection, noticing changes in my condition sometimes before I did. "You should consider hospice care," he suggested gently one afternoon, as he checked my oxygen levels. "Not because the end is imminent, but because they can make you more comfortable at home." Home. Megan's apartment had become that somehow, the place where I would likely take my last breath, surrounded by a family I hadn't expected, but had come to cherish. One night, when sleep eluded me and the weight on my chest felt heavier than usual, I called Ethan with an unusual request. "There's a box in my dresser drawer," I explained. "I need you to give it to Megan after I'm gone." "Don't talk like that," he protested. "You're not going anywhere yet." "We both know that's not true," I said, my voice steady despite the effort it took to speak. "Promise me, Ethan." He was quiet for a long moment. "I promise." In the box, I'd placed the things that mattered most. The letters I'd written to Megan over the years, both sent and unsent. The tiny red collar with Max's name written in my unsteady hand. And a final note I'd composed in the stillness of early mornings when pain kept me awake. Children aren't obligated to love their parents, but parents never stop loving their children even when forgotten. As it turned out, I lived long enough to see my granddaughter born, a tiny, perfect being with Megan's stubborn chin and eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond her minutes on Earth. I held her just once, my arms steadier than they'd been in months, as if my body understood the importance of this moment and granted me a temporary reprieve from its failings. "Her name is Maxine," Megan told me, tears streaming down her face as she watched us. Max for short. Today, little Max is 5 years old, with her grandmother's sharp cheekbones and my love of gardening. She never knew the golden retriever she was named for, but Megan keeps his memory alive through stories. And on the bookshelf in their living room, displayed like a museum piece, sits a small red collar with a faded name written in black marker, beside a framed photograph of an old man and his dog. The inscription beneath it reads, "To the only man my father truly knew." And maybe that's enough. To be truly known by someone, even if only a dog. To be remembered not for our failures or weaknesses, but for the love we gave without condition or expectation of return. In the end, isn't that all any of us can hope for? Sometimes the deepest wounds come from those closest to us. Edward's journey reminds us that family isn't always defined by blood, but by who stands beside us when the world turns cold. Would you have had the strength to forgive as he did? To rebuild a relationship that had been shattered by betrayal? Or would bitterness have consumed you, stealing whatever precious time remained? We often search for meaning in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but Edward found his truth in the simple loyalty of a dog and the unexpected friendship of a young veterinarian. Perhaps that's the most powerful lesson of all, that love and recognition can come from the most unexpected places, and it's never too late to create the family you deserve, rather than cling to the one that failed you. If this story touched your heart today, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of resilience, forgiveness, and unconditional love. Let us know in the comments if you've ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to a beautiful new beginning, because sometimes our greatest pain becomes the doorway to our most meaningful connections.